The email arrived at 6:42 a.m., 3 hours before my alarm, and it took exactly 9 words to quietly remove me from my own life. Per family decision, the property transfer has been finalized. No greeting, no signature, no explanation. Just that. I was lying in bed, staring at the pale winter light creeping through the blinds of my apartment in Evanston, Illinois, when I opened it. For a moment, I thought it was spam, or a misdirected corporate notice. I read it again, slower this time. The way you read something when you already know it's bad, but your brain refuses to catch up. Per family decision. Property transfer. Finalized. My name, Margaret Holloway, did not appear anywhere in the message. Neither did the address of the house I had lived in for 12 years. The house my grandmother left to be shared by the grandchildren in her handwritten will. The house I had paid the taxes on. The house I had repaired, insured, and quietly protected, while everyone else treated it like a sentimental backdrop for holidays. I sat up in bed and felt that familiar, unwelcome sensation in my chest. Not panic, not shock. Recognition. I was 33 years old. I worked as a contracts manager for a mid-sized logistics firm downtown. The kind of job where you learn to read what isn't written just as carefully as what is. I spent my days tracking clauses, anticipating risk, documenting accountability. I was good at it because I had learned early that survival depends on noticing patterns before they turn into disasters. And this email wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. The subject line read, Estate Update, Holloway Residence. The sender was a junior associate at a law firm I recognized. A firm my father's golf buddy recommended. A firm I was never told we'd hired. I scrolled down. No attachment. No legal explanation. Just a single line at the bottom, almost as an afterthought. If you have questions, please direct them to your parents. I laughed. It came out dry and sharp like a bark. Questions. I had a lot of those. But I already knew the answers. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and pressed my feet into the cold hardwood floor, grounding myself. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I lived alone now. That had been a recent change. 2 months earlier, my engagement had quietly dissolved over a kitchen table conversation that ended with my fiancé saying, "Your family always comes first, and I don't think I ever will." At the time, I told myself he was exaggerating. Now, sitting there in the dim light with my phone buzzing faintly from unread notifications, I realized he had simply seen the truth before I was ready to admit it. My family didn't come first. They came instead of me. I opened my laptop and pulled up the scanned copy of my grandmother Eleanor Holloway's will, the one I had saved the day she died, because I was the only grandchild who understood how these things worked. Eleanor had raised 3 children in that old brick house in Oak Park. She'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners that felt more like strategic meetings, Christmas mornings that revolved around appearances rather than warmth. She had been a complicated woman, sharp, controlling, but fair in her own rigid way. At least, I thought she was. The will was simple, handwritten, notarized, the house to be retained within the family and shared by the grandchildren, with primary residence rights given to Margaret Holloway should she choose to reside there. I had chosen. I had lived there through law school, through my first job, through my first heartbreak. I had painted the bedrooms, replaced the roof, installed the security system after a break-in my parents dismissed as bad luck. I had been the one who stayed. My younger brother, Daniel, had never wanted the house. He wanted liquidity. He wanted flexibility. He wanted the money without the responsibility. My older sister, Claire, wanted the symbolism, the photos, the ability to say, "It's still in the family," while never actually setting foot inside it unless there was a camera involved. And my parents, Richard and Susan Holloway, wanted control. They always had. My phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. "Good morning, honey. Busy day ahead. Call me later." The timing was almost impressive. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the county records website. Cook County, property search. I typed in the address I knew by heart, and there it was. Owner, Daniel Holloway. Transfer date, yesterday. Method, quitclaim deed. Filed at 3:17 p.m. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening, my hands steady. Quitclaim. That told me everything. No sale. No compensation. just a quiet transfer of ownership, likely executed under the guise of simplifying things. A phrase my parents loved to use when they meant removing you from the equation. I closed the laptop and stood up, wrapping a sweater around myself. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below. The early commuters, the woman walking her dog. The normal rhythm of a world that had no idea my foundation had just been pulled out from under me. This wasn't about the house. It never was. It was about exclusion, about deciding, without telling me, that my role in the family story had reached its expiration date. I thought back to Christmas dinner 3 weeks earlier, the way my mother had insisted on seating arrangements, the way my father had cleared his throat every time I spoke, the way Daniel had joked about needing a place with better resale value, while Claire smiled thinly and said nothing. I had felt it then, the shift. The quiet agreement happening around me while I was still in the room. This email was just the paperwork catching up. I grabbed my coat and keys and headed for the door. I wasn't going to call them. Not yet. I needed to see something first. I needed to stand in the house one more time, feel the walls, confirm that the life I had built there hadn't already been erased in more ways than one. As I locked my apartment door behind me, I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. Because when people remove you from decisions that affect your future, they don't expect you to respond with clarity. They expect confusion, emotion, compliance. They expect silence. And for most of my life, that's exactly what they'd gotten. But this time, they had finalized something without understanding what they'd triggered. And as I walked toward my car, phone still silent in my pocket, one thought settled calmly into place. If they thought this was over, they had miscalculated badly. I didn't tell anyone I was driving to Oak Park. Not my parents, not my siblings, not even the one friend who still checked in on me every Sunday, out of habit rather than obligation. Some things you don't announce. You just do them. The drive from Evanston took 40 minutes in light traffic, long enough for memory to start creeping in through the cracks. Every exit sign pulled up a different version of myself. College Margaret, newly engaged Margaret, the version of me who still believed that if I stayed reasonable long enough, fairness would eventually show up on its own. I parked across the street from the house. It looked exactly the same. Red brick, white trim. The maple tree out front that dropped leaves like clockwork every October. The porch light I'd replaced 3 years earlier because my father kept forgetting. Nothing about it suggested that ownership had changed overnight. That was the first thing that made my stomach tighten. Systems that remove you rarely announce themselves with visible chaos. They keep everything familiar, so you question your reaction instead of their behavior. I sat in the car for a full minute before getting out, then another. Finally, I opened the door and stepped onto the sidewalk. The air was sharp with cold, the kind that wakes you up whether you want it to or not. I crossed the street slowly, like I was approaching an animal that might spook if I moved too fast. I had keys. Of course I did. I'd paid for the locksmith myself after my grandmother's stroke, when she started forgetting where she put things. I slid the key into the lock. It turned. The door opened. That shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Inside, the house smelled wrong. Not bad, just altered. A different candle. Citrus instead of vanilla. The faint scent of a men's cologne I didn't recognize. The entryway rug was gone, the one my grandmother bought in Santa Fe and insisted was ugly but honest. In its place was something beige, generic, disposable. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The silence pressed in immediately. Furniture had shifted, not removed, repositioned. The armchair angled away from the window, the bookshelf reorganized, family photos moved to eye level, while everything else was pushed lower, less visible. It was a takeover, not a renovation. I walked into the kitchen. My mug was gone. The chipped blue one I used every morning, replaced with a matching set of gray ceramic cups, lined up precisely next to the coffee maker. Precision without familiarity. I opened the fridge. Half the shelves were empty, my leftovers gone, my labeled containers missing. In their place, energy drinks, meal prep boxes, protein shakes. Daniel. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. The email had said finalized, But this told me something more important. This wasn't a discussion that got out of hand. This was a plan already in motion. My phone buzzed. Dad. I let it ring. Then again, Mom. Then a text. Where are you? We need to talk. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked upstairs. My bedroom door was closed. That stopped me cold. I reached for the handle. Locked. I stared at it for a long moment, my hand still hovering, as if the door might apologize and open on its own. It didn't. I knocked once. Sharp. Controlled. Footsteps. Heavy. The door opened. Daniel stood there, shirtless, holding his phone like I'd interrupted something important. "Oh," he said. "You're here." The word here landed wrong. As if I were a guest. As if the house had already shifted allegiances. "You changed the locks," I said. Daniel shrugged. Mom said it would be less confusing. Less confusing for whom? Behind him, my room looked smaller. The bed stripped, my desk cleared, boxes stacked against the far wall. My framed diploma leaned face down, propped carelessly like an afterthought. I stepped past him without asking permission. "You can't just," he started. "I can," I said, not raising my voice. "And I am," he scoffed. "You don't own the place anymore." There it was, out loud, the sentence they'd been rehearsing. I turned to face him. He looked uncomfortable now, defensive, like someone who'd been promised an easy win and was realizing there might be conditions attached. "Did you sign anything?" I asked. He hesitated. That was answer enough. "Mom and Dad handled it," he said finally. "They said it was cleaner this way. You're too emotional about the house." I nodded slowly. Emotional. That was always the word they used when they needed to discredit me without engaging. "I want my files," I said. "My documents. My personal property." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Most of it's in storage." "Where?" "Mom knows." Of course she did. I pulled out my phone and dialed her. She answered on the first ring. "Margaret," she said, voice tight. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" I looked at the stripped walls of my bedroom. "You didn't tell me you were taking my home." A pause. Then the sigh. The one that always meant I'd just violated an unspoken rule. "We did what we thought was best," she said. "You've been under so much stress. The engagement ending, your job. We didn't want you making decisions you'd regret." "I didn't make a decision," I said. "You made it for me." "Daniel needs stability," she replied. "You're resilient. You always bounce back." There it was again. The compliment that functioned as justification. I closed my eyes. "Where are my things?" I asked. Another pause. "In the garage. Most of it." "Unlocked?" "Yes." "Good," I said, "because I'm taking them." "Margaret, I'm not discussing this," I cut in. "This isn't emotional. It's logistical." I ended the call before she could respond. Daniel watched me like he was waiting for an outburst. I didn't give him one. I walked past him, down the stairs, and out into the garage. The door creaked open. My life was stacked against the wall in labeled boxes. Law books. Personal. Winter clothes. Desk. Someone had taken the time to organize my erasure. I knelt and opened the box marked documents. Inside were tax records, insurance papers, and, tucked beneath them, a thin folder I didn't recognize. I opened it. Power of attorney, Eleanor Holloway, dated 6 months before her death. Assigned to Richard Holloway, my father. My pulse slowed. This wasn't just a family decision. This was legal maneuvering, carefully timed, quietly executed. And suddenly, the email made sense. I stood up slowly, the folder heavy in my hands. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd rewritten authority. And they were counting on me, not knowing the difference. I closed the garage door behind me and loaded the boxes into my car, one by one. Daniel didn't help. He didn't stop me either. As I drove away, my phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. "We can talk this through, like adults." I didn't respond, because I had just realized something crucial. They thought this was a family dispute, but what they'd actually done was trigger a process. And once that process started, it wouldn't be resolved with conversation. It would be resolved with documentation. And in that arena, I didn't lose. Not anymore. I didn't go home after Oak Park. I drove straight downtown, past the office buildings and frozen construction sites, until I reached a quiet stretch near the river where the coffee shop stayed open for people who didn't sleep well and thought too much. I parked, carried one box inside, and claimed a corner table. The box was labeled documents, but what it really held was leverage. I ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream. I needed my hands steady, my head clear. For most of my life, whenever something went wrong with my family, my instinct had been to de-escalate, smooth it over, let things slide, for the sake of peace. I had been praised for that, told I was mature, easy, the strong one. But strength, I was learning, was the excuse they used when they didn't want to protect you. I opened the folder again. Power of Attorney, Eleanor Holloway. The pages were crisp, properly notarized. No obvious irregularities. On the surface, it was clean. My grandmother had signed it 6 months before she died, granting my father authority to manage her financial and property affairs in the event of incapacity. The language mattered. Incapacity. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the photo album labeled Grandma. I had hundreds of pictures. Holidays, birthdays, random afternoons. And then, buried a little deeper, medical paperwork I'd photographed during her last year, because no one else bothered. Doctor's notes, cognitive assessments, dates. I laid them out mentally, side by side with the power of attorney date. Something didn't align. Eleanor Holloway had been sharp until the very end. Stubborn, yes. Slower, maybe. But legally incapacitated? No. Not 6 months before her death. I felt the first flicker of something close to satisfaction. Not because I wanted my parents to be guilty of anything criminal. That kind of mess stains everyone involved. But because the truth was starting to show its edges. They hadn't planned for resistance. They'd planned for compliance. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and connected to the cafe's Wi-Fi. Logged into my work email, then into the private legal research database my firm subscribed to. I wasn't using it for work purposes, but I knew where the line was. Public records, case law, precedent. I searched for cases involving posthumous property transfers executed under questionable power of attorney authority. There were plenty. Most didn't end well for the people who tried to get clever. The common thread wasn't malice, it was arrogance. I took a slow sip of coffee and let that settle. My phone buzzed again. Claire this time. My sister never called unless she wanted something or needed to appear reasonable. I let it ring. Then she texted, "Can we not do this like enemies? You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I stared at the message. This, bigger. The passive language was almost impressive. I typed back one sentence. I didn't make it bigger. I just noticed it. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Good. I went back to work. I cross-referenced the power of attorney notarization with the notary's public log. It took time, but eventually I found it. A mobile notary service operating out of Naperville. The date matched. The location didn't. The form listed Eleanor's residence as Oak Park, but the notary's log showed the signing took place at a rehabilitation center in Skokie, a facility Eleanor had never stayed at. My jaw tightened. That wasn't a mistake. That was either sloppiness or something worse. I packed up the box, finished my coffee, and headed back to my apartment. When I got home, I laid everything out on my dining table. Documents, notes, printed screenshots. A timeline began to form. 6 months before Eleanor's death. Power of attorney signed. 4 months before her death. My parents convinced her to let them help with bill payments. 2 months before her death. I was encouraged to take a longer work trip so you don't have to worry about her. 1 month before her death. Eleanor was moved into hospice care, limited visitors. After her death, the will is read. The house remains to be shared. 6 weeks later, quitclaim deed filed, ownership transferred to Daniel. No notification. No consent. No compensation. It wasn't clean. It was just quiet. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. This was the moment I would have once called my mother, asked her to explain, given her space to spin the narrative until I doubted myself. I didn't do that anymore. Instead, I made one call, not to a family member, to an attorney. Her name was Laura Kim. I'd met her once at a professional seminar on estate disputes. She specialized in elder law and contested wills. Calm, precise, not easily impressed. She answered on the second ring. Laura Kim. "Hi," I said. "This is Margaret Holloway. We met briefly at the Chicago Bar Symposium last spring. A pause. Yes, she said. I remember you. Contracts manager, right? That's me, I said. I need a consult. Silence again. Not suspicious. Focused. Tell me what happened, she said. I did. I didn't editorialize. I didn't vent. I laid out facts, dates, documents. When I finished, there was a long pause. Finally, Laura spoke. They moved faster than they should have, she said, and sloppier than they realized. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. So you see it too. I do, she said. This isn't about the house. This is about authority abuse. What are my options? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked, are you prepared for this to get uncomfortable? Yes. Are you prepared for your family to accuse you of betrayal? Yes. And are you prepared to follow through, even if they suddenly want to talk things out? That one took half a second longer. Yes, I said. Laura exhaled softly. Good, she said. Then the first step isn't confrontation. It's preservation. Meaning? Meaning you don't tell them anything yet, she replied. You don't threaten. You don't explain. You secure evidence. You document access. And you let me send a letter. My heart thudded once, heavy and slow. A letter meant this was no longer personal. It was procedural. What kind of letter? I asked. A notice of representation, she said, and a demand for disclosure. I closed my eyes. I could already hear my mother's voice. Why are you doing this to us? I didn't respond to that voice. I listened to Laura. Once they receive it, she continued, the dynamic shifts. They can't control the narrative anymore. Everything they do becomes discoverable. Discoverable. That word had weight. Do it, I said. Laura paused. One more thing, she added. If you want to retain access to the property during this process, we need to move quickly. They may try to sell. My stomach dropped. They wouldn't, I said automatically. Laura didn't react. They already transferred it, she said calmly. Don't underestimate what people will do when they feel entitled. I ended the call 10 minutes later, with a retainer agreement in my inbox. I signed it without hesitation. The moment my name appeared on that document, something shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was initiating. My phone buzzed again. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. Then, a text. Daniel's upset. You didn't need to scare him like that today. I stared at the message, then deleted it. Not blocked, deleted. I wasn't ready for silence yet. I wanted them to feel the gap forming. That night, I slept for the first time without replaying conversations in my head, because for the first time, I wasn't wondering what they would do next. I was planning what I would. And somewhere between the power of attorney and the quitclaim deed, my parents had forgotten something crucial. They had raised the one person in the family who knew how to read contracts. And now, she was reading theirs. The letter went out on a Wednesday. Laura warned me not to expect immediate fallout. People don't explode right away when they're confronted with something they don't understand yet. First comes denial, then control attempts. Panic only shows up when control fails. Still, when I saw the delivery confirmation pop up in my inbox at 10:17 a.m., my pulse jumped once and then settled. Notice of representation. Demand for disclosure. Request for accounting of estate actions. Cold words. Neutral tone. Devastating implications. I imagined my parents' dining room table, the one where every important decision had always been made without me. I imagined my mother opening the envelope, scanning it too quickly, then rereading it slower when she realized it wasn't a bill or a holiday card. I imagined my father clearing his throat. I didn't imagine apologies. By noon, my phone started ringing. Not my mother. My father. That was new. I watched it vibrate on my desk until it stopped. 30 seconds later, a voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen to it. I knew the pattern well enough by now. If I listened too early, I'd start negotiating with myself before anyone else even spoke. At 12:14, Claire texted, "What is going on? Mom is freaking out." I replied with exactly one sentence. "You can speak to my attorney." Nothing else. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. At 1:02, my mother finally texted, "Why would you do this without talking to us first?" I stared at the screen. This was the line they always used when they were caught. Not, "What did we do wrong?" but "Why didn't you give us a chance to explain it away?" I didn't respond. At 3:40, Laura emailed, "They called. She wrote, "Your father first, then your mother. Your brother attempted to speak on your behalf and was redirected." I exhaled slowly. "How did they sound?" I typed back. "Unprepared," she replied, and irritated that the conversation was no longer emotional. That made me smile. Just a little. Laura followed up with another message. "They are disputing your standing, but they haven't denied the timeline." That mattered. Disputing standing meant they were trying to keep me out of the process. Not disputing facts meant the facts were solid. That evening, I listened to my father's voicemail. "Margaret," he said, voice tight, "this is unnecessary. We were trying to help everyone. I don't understand why you're making this adversarial. Call me." He sounded tired, not remorseful. I deleted it. The next day, Daniel emailed me from his personal account. Subject: "Can we be adults about this?" I opened it out of professional curiosity, not hope. "Maggie," he wrote, "Mom says lawyers are involved now. I don't get why this has to turn into a whole thing. You weren't even living there full-time anymore. If this is about money, we can figure something out." There it was. Money. As if this were a misunderstanding of value, rather than an erasure of agency. I forwarded the email to Laura. She replied within minutes. "Do not respond." I didn't. By Friday, the disclosures started coming in. Bank statements, property tax records, copies of emails between my parents and the law firm. And then, buried in the second batch, something that made my breath stop. A memo. Internal. From the junior associate who had emailed me originally. Subject: risk assessment. Holloway Estate. I read it twice, then the third time. The memo outlined potential exposure related to the power of attorney execution timing. It noted that one beneficiary resides in the property and may contest the transfer. It recommended completing transfer before notification to avoid obstruction. Before notification, they knew. They had been advised. They moved anyway. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. This wasn't favoritism. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was a calculated decision to remove me before I could object. I forwarded the memo to Laura without comment. Her reply came 10 minutes later. "This changes posture." "What does that mean?" I typed. "It means we're no longer asking," she wrote. "We're asserting." On Sunday, my parents showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I saw their car from the window, parked crooked, too close to the hydrant. My first instinct was to freeze, the old reflex. Then I stood up. I didn't open the door. I let them knock. Once. Twice. Harder. Finally, my mother's voice carried through the wood. "Margaret, this is ridiculous. We need to talk." I opened the door just enough to step into the hallway. I didn't invite them in. "We don't," I said calmly. "You need to leave." My mother stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You can't shut us out," she said. "We're your parents." "I didn't shut you out," I replied. "You shut me out. This is just the consequence." My father stepped forward, palms out. "Let's not escalate this," he said. "We can fix it." I looked at him. "Fixing it would require undoing it," I said. "Are you offering that?" Silence. My mother's jaw tightened. "That house was never really yours," she snapped. "You just acted like it was." Something in me went very still. "Get out," I said. She opened her mouth again. Now. They left, not because they understood, but because for the first time, they realized they couldn't push. That night, I received a message from Laura. "They've requested mediation," she wrote, without admitting fault. I stared at the words. Mediation meant they wanted control back. They wanted to contain the damage. I typed back, "No mediation." A pause. Then, understood. 2 days later, Laura filed a formal petition to challenge the power of attorney, to freeze the property title, to compel testimony. It was public record now. My mother called 3 times. My father once. Claire texted, "You're tearing the family apart." I didn't, because something had become clear. Families that rely on one person's silence don't fall apart when that person speaks. They fall apart because they were never stable to begin with. And as the legal process moved forward, step by step, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not anger, not grief, authority. For the first time in my life, decisions about my future were no longer being made in rooms I wasn't allowed to enter. They were being made on record, and everyone was required to tell the truth. The mediation request didn't come through Laura. It came through my mother. She left a voicemail on Tuesday morning, the kind she used to leave when she wanted to sound reasonable to anyone who might listen later. "Margaret," she said softly, carefully, "your father and I have been thinking. We don't want this to turn into something ugly. Families work things out privately. If lawyers are the issue, we're willing to compromise." Compromise. That word had been repurposed so many times in my family, it barely resembled its original meaning. I deleted the voicemail without replying. An hour later, Daniel texted, "Can we grab coffee? Just us. No drama." I stared at the message longer than I needed to. This was the phase where they sent intermediaries. The one who could claim innocence. The one who could say he just wanted peace, not realizing peace always required my surrender. I replied with one sentence. "If you have something to say, put it in writing." He didn't respond for 2 days. When he did, it wasn't coffee. It was an offer. An email, copied to my sister Claire, sent late Sunday night. "Margaret," Daniel wrote, "Mom and Dad are willing to transfer a cash settlement to you so this doesn't drag on. They think it's fair, considering you weren't planning to stay in the house forever anyway. Let's just put numbers on it and move forward." I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Laura. Her reply came fast. "This is an admission that the transfer was improper." I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. "They're offering money to avoid discovery," she continued. "That's not compromise. That's containment." Containment. Exactly. They weren't trying to make me whole. They were trying to make me quiet. I didn't respond to Daniel. I didn't respond to Claire. Instead, I went to work. That week, Laura deposed the notary. Not formally yet, just a recorded statement, carefully obtained. The notary couldn't remember Eleanor. She remembered my father. She remembered being paid in cash. She didn't remember the address clearly, but she did remember something else. She was very alert, the notary said on the recording. She corrected him when he tried to explain things for her. I listened to the playback in Laura's office, hands folded in my lap. She asked questions, the notary continued. I remember thinking, she didn't seem incapacitated at all. Laura paused the recording. "That's important," she said. "It's devastating," I replied. That same afternoon, my mother showed up at my workplace. Security called my desk. "There's a woman here asking for you," the receptionist said carefully. "She says she's your mother." I closed my eyes. "Tell her I'm unavailable," I said, "and that future visits need to go through counsel." There was a pause. "She's insisting." I stood up. "I'll handle it." I met my mother in the lobby. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not weaker, just diminished. The confidence she wore like perfume had thinned. "Margaret," she said, stepping forward. "You didn't need to embarrass us like this." I didn't invite her to sit. "This isn't embarrassment," I said. "It's accountability." She shook her head. "You've always been dramatic." I smiled faintly. "That's interesting," I said, "because all of this happened without my involvement. I'm just responding." She lowered her voice. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to your father?" she hissed. "His friends are asking questions." The country club attorney stopped returning his calls. There it was. Reputation. That was the real currency. "You should have thought about that," I said evenly, "before you decided to remove me from my own inheritance." Her mouth tightened. "You didn't need the house," she snapped. "You don't even have children." I looked at her. "That's your justification?" "It's reality," she said. "Daniel needs it more." The favoritism wasn't subtle anymore. It was defensive. "Leave," I said. She stared at me. "I raised you," she said quietly. "I gave up things for you." I held her gaze. "You raised me to be competent," I said. "You just didn't expect me to use it against you." She slapped her purse against her side and turned away without another word. That night, Claire finally called. Not texted. Called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I answered. "What do you want?" I asked. "You're destroying everything," she said. "Mom can't sleep. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof." I waited. "You could have handled this quietly," she continued. "Instead, you made it public." I laughed once. "You made it public when you filed paperwork without telling me," I said. "I just refused to pretend it didn't happen." There was silence. Then, softer. "What do you want?" That was the real question. "I want the truth on record," I said. "And I want my name restored, where it belongs." Claire exhaled. "Daniel will never forgive you," she said. "That's not my problem," I replied. After I hung up, I sat in my dark apartment for a long time. This was the point where people usually caved. When the pressure stopped being abstract and started being personal. When the guilt narratives reached maximum volume. But something had shifted in me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was finished. The next morning, Laura called. "We're filing a motion to compel testimony from your parents and brother," she said. "They'll be under oath." I closed my eyes. "Do it." There was a pause. "One more thing," she added. "Your brother's financial disclosures show he's already taken out a line of credit against the house." My breath caught. "He leveraged it?" "Yes," she said. "Which complicates his position considerably." Complicates. That was one word for it. I hung up and stared out the window at the city, waking up. They hadn't just taken the house. They'd treated it like an ATM. And suddenly, the story they were telling everyone else began to unravel. Because once money moves, motives become visible. And once motives are visible, silence is no longer the most dangerous thing in the room. Truth is, and it had finally entered the conversation. The subpoenas went out on a Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, my mother stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. She left me a voicemail that was no longer soft, no longer reasonable. "This has gone too far," she said. "You don't drag your family into court like criminals." I listened to it once, then archived it. Criminals was an interesting word. She had chosen it, not me. The depositions were scheduled for the following week. Separate rooms, separate times. Laura was deliberate about that. People tell a different story when they can't synchronize their lies. My parents would go first. Daniel, last. I took the day off work, not because I needed the time, but because I didn't want to sit in an office pretending this wasn't happening. I dressed simply. Dark blazer, no jewelry. The kind of outfit that doesn't invite commentary. Laura met me outside the conference center. "You don't have to be in the room," she said. "You can wait." "I want to hear it," I replied. She nodded once. No judgment, just acknowledgement. My father went first. He looked older than I remembered. Not frail, just diminished by the weight of being forced to answer questions without my mother translating reality for him. Under oath, he was cautious. Too cautious. He claimed the power of attorney was Eleanor's idea, that she wanted efficiency, that the quitclaim deed was done to avoid confusion among the siblings. Laura let him talk. Then she asked one question. "Did you inform Margaret Holloway of the transfer before it occurred?" He hesitated. That pause was recorded. "No," he said finally. "Why not?" "We didn't think it was necessary." "Why not?" Another pause. She would have objected. There it was. The reason, stated plainly. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain, but clarity. My mother's deposition was different. She was composed, controlled, smiling in the way that suggested she believed charm could still carry her through. She framed everything as concern. Margaret was overwhelmed. Margaret had just ended an engagement. Margaret wasn't thinking clearly. Laura waited. Then she asked about the internal memo, the one recommending transfer before notification. My mother's smile faltered. "I don't recall seeing that," she said. Laura slid the document across the table. "It was forwarded from your email address," she said calmly. My mother looked down, then back up. "Well," she said, "legal advice can be confusing for non-professionals." Laura didn't argue. She just asked, "Did you follow that advice?" Silence. My mother's foot tapped under the table. "I trusted my husband," she said. Another deflection. Another attempt to pass responsibility. By the time her deposition ended, her voice had lost its warmth. Control was slipping. Daniel's deposition was last. He walked in with a confidence that suggested he still believed this was about feelings, not facts. He spoke freely. Too freely. He said the house had been gifted to him, that I wasn't using it efficiently, that my parents wanted to protect family assets. Laura waited. Then she asked about the line of credit. His posture changed. "That was temporary," he said. "I needed liquidity." "For what?" Laura asked. He shrugged. "Investments." "What kind?" Another pause. "Personal." Laura slid a document across the table. "Isn't it true," she asked, "that you used the line of credit to pay off personal debt and fund a down payment on a condominium in Florida?" Daniel's face went red. "That's none of her business," he snapped. Laura didn't react. "It becomes her business," she said evenly. when the asset used as collateral is under legal dispute. Daniel looked at me then, really looked at me. For the first time since Oak Park, he seemed uncertain. "You didn't need to do this," he said. I didn't respond. This wasn't a conversation. This was a record. Afterward, Laura and I sat in her office. She closed the file and leaned back. "They're exposed," she said. "Not criminally, but civilly? Very." "What happens now?" I asked. "We file for summary judgment on the transfer," she replied. Given the timeline, the advisory memo, and the financial leverage, there's a strong case for invalidation. Invalidation. The word landed softly, but its meaning was seismic. The transfer could be undone. The house could revert. "And Daniel?" I asked. "He's over-leveraged an asset he may not legally own," Laura said. "That's his problem." I nodded. That night, Claire called again. Her voice was different now, quieter. "I didn't know," she said, "about the memo, about the loan." "I know," I replied. "Mom is blaming you," she said. "Dad isn't saying much. Daniel's furious." I waited. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. There it was, the old instinct rising in her. I answered honestly. "Nothing," I said. "This isn't something you fix." After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about the word family, how it had been used to excuse everything, how it had been weaponized to demand silence. Under oath, without the ability to reframe or soften, the truth had finally surfaced, not as drama, not as betrayal, as sequence. And sequences, once recorded, are very hard to argue with. The next filing would change everything. Not because I raised my voice, but because I let the system do what it was designed to do, when people assume no one is watching. I went to bed that night knowing one thing with certainty. They had lost control of the narrative. And control, in my family, had always been the only thing that mattered. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning in late November, the kind of gray, brittle day that makes everything feel sharper than it should. Trees stripped bare, sidewalks dusted with salt. Chicago settling into that long, unforgiving stretch between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to sit in the room before it filled. Courtrooms have a way of telling you who has power before anyone speaks, where people choose to sit, who looks at who avoids eye contact. Laura met me outside courtroom 418. "They'll be here," she said, adjusting the file under her arm. "They're not backing out now." "I didn't think they would," I replied. My parents arrived together. That, too, was new. My mother wore black. Not mourning black, strategic black. She looked like someone preparing to be seen as wronged. My father followed half a step behind her, hands clasped, eyes scanning the room, like he was looking for an exit. Daniel arrived alone. Claire wasn't there. I noted that, without comment. We didn't speak. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement. My mother glanced at me once, sharp and assessing, like she was still trying to read which version of me had shown up. This one didn't offer anything. When the judge entered, the room stood, then settled. The case was called Holloway versus Holloway. The irony wasn't lost on me. Laura spoke first. She didn't dramatize. She didn't editorialize. She laid out a sequence of events so cleanly, it felt almost surgical. Timeline, documents, advisory memo, financial leverage. She didn't accuse my parents of malice. She didn't need to. The facts did that work on their own. The opposing counsel, hired late and chosen poorly, argued family intent, claimed ambiguity, claimed generosity, claimed my parents had acted in good faith to preserve family harmony. The judge listened, then asked one question. Why was the beneficiary not informed prior to transfer? The room went still. Opposing counsel hesitated. "Well, Your Honor," he said, "there was concern that she might object." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Objecting," he said slowly, "is not grounds for exclusion." Silence. Then the judge leaned back. "I've read the filings," he said, "and I've reviewed the advisory memo." My mother's posture stiffened. "The court finds that the transfer raises sufficient questions of authority misuse to warrant invalidation pending further proceedings." I felt my breath catch, just once. "In the meantime," the judge continued, "a temporary injunction is placed on the property. No sale, no refinancing, no encumbrance. Daniel's face drained of color. The judge turned to him. You leveraged an asset under dispute, he said. That was ill-advised. Understatement of the year. The gavel came down. Motion granted, just like that. The house was frozen. Control was gone. Outside the courtroom, my mother finally spoke. You're enjoying this, she said bitterly. I looked at her. No, I said. I'm relieved. My father said nothing. Daniel stared at the floor. Laura squeezed my arm once. That was clean, she said. I nodded. Clean was the word. Not vindictive, not explosive, just final. That afternoon, the first crack appeared in the family facade, a voicemail from my father. Not angry, not defensive, quiet. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. I don't recognize where we ended up. I didn't call him back. That night, Claire texted. They're fighting, she wrote. Really fighting. I stared at the message for a long moment, then replied, I'm not getting involved, and I meant it. Because something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, the conflict existed without me managing it, without me absorbing it, without me smoothing the edges. The system they built around my silence was collapsing under its own weight, and I wasn't inside it anymore. Thanksgiving came and went without an invitation. So did Christmas planning. The absence hurt, but it didn't hollow me out the way it once would have. I was building something else now, not a counter-narrative, a boundary. And as the year closed, one thing became clear. The court hadn't just paused a property transfer, it had exposed a pattern. And patterns, once seen, can't be unseen. The next move wouldn't come from anger. It would come from inevitability. Because when control is removed from people who rely on it, they don't become kinder. They become desperate. And desperation, unlike silence, leaves fingerprints everywhere. Desperation doesn't announce itself loudly at first. It starts with adjustments, tone shifts, small concessions framed as generosity. People who wouldn't return your calls suddenly want to clear the air. 3 days after the injunction, my mother emailed Laura directly, not me. Laura forwarded it without commentary. Given recent developments, my mother wrote, we are open to discussing an alternative resolution that avoids further damage to the family. Damage, that word again. Always vague, always bloodless. Laura replied on my behalf with a single paragraph. All communication should be directed through counsel. Please specify the terms you wish to propose. The response came within the hour. That alone told me everything. They weren't regrouping. They were scrambling. The proposal arrived as a PDF attachment. 3 pages, carefully worded. Reviewed by a different attorney this time, someone more expensive, someone whose hourly rate was meant to intimidate. It offered me a settlement, a clean exit, a lump sum payment equivalent to roughly 30% of the house's estimated market value. In exchange, I would withdraw the petition, waive future claims, and acknowledge the transfer to Daniel as consistent with family intent. Family intent. I laughed when I read that line, not because it was funny, because it was revealing. They weren't just trying to end the dispute. They were trying to rewrite the record. I met Laura in her office that afternoon. She had the document open on her desk, annotated with yellow tabs. They're nervous, she said. This is the first time they've acknowledged you have leverage. And? I asked. And it's a bad deal, she said flatly. For you. I nodded. I figured. Not because of the money, she continued, but because of the language. They want you to legitimize the process retroactively. They want absolution, I said. Yes, Laura replied. Without accountability. I leaned back in the chair. Counter? I asked. She looked at me carefully. We can, she said. But you should understand something first. I waited. If this goes to full hearing, she said, there's a strong chance the court invalidates the transfer entirely. The house would revert to the estate. That doesn't guarantee you sole ownership, but it restores your standing. And? I prompted. And it will be public, she said. Depositions, filings, possibly testimony about your grandmother's condition. I exhaled slowly. This was the fork in the road. One path ended quietly, with money and silence. The other ended openly, with truth and fallout. What would you do? I asked. Laura paused, then smiled, just slightly. If this were my family, she said, I'd be tired of being asked to disappear politely. That decided it. No counter, I said. Reject. Laura raised an eyebrow. Clean rejection? She asked. Clean, I replied. No commentary. She nodded. I'll notify them. 2 hours later, my mother called. From a blocked number, I answered. Not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to hear the shift. You could have had this end quietly, she said immediately. No greeting, no preamble. I held the phone away from my ear slightly. You should be careful, I said calmly. You're calling a represented party. She inhaled sharply. You're hiding behind lawyers now? I'm protecting myself, I replied. You taught me how. Silence. Then, lower, sharper. You're going to destroy everything we built. I thought about the house, the money, the image. You destroyed it, I said. I just stopped pretending. Her voice cracked, not with sadness, with frustration. You were always the reasonable one, she said. Why are you doing this? I closed my eyes. Because being reasonable cost me my place, I said. And I'm done paying that price. She hung up. That night, Claire came over. She stood in my doorway, coat still on, eyes tired. I didn't know where else to go, she said. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. No wine, no comfort rituals, just truth. They're scared, she said. Dad especially. I know. They think you're punishing them. I looked at her. I'm not, I said. I'm opting out. She stared at her hands. Daniel's condo deal is falling apart, she said quietly. The bank froze the loan. I didn't react. That house, she continued, was supposed to be his reset. They promised him it would fix everything. There it was. The real motive, not favoritism. Salvation. They hadn't just given Daniel the house because they loved him more. They'd given it to him because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. And you? I asked. Claire looked up. I was supposed to keep you calm, she admitted. They thought if anyone could manage you, it was me. I nodded. Are you angry? She asked. I considered it. No, I said. I'm finished. She swallowed. They want you at Christmas. I smiled faintly. No, I said. They want absolution. Claire didn't argue. She just nodded once. When she left, the apartment felt lighter, not empty, unburdened. The next week, Laura filed notice rejecting the settlement and advancing the case. The press never picked it up. It wasn't dramatic enough. But within our circle, the shift was immediate. Friends asked fewer questions. Relatives stopped calling. The narrative stalled without my participation. And that, I realized, was the point. The final hearing was scheduled for mid-January. Until then, the house remained frozen, untouchable, like a truth no one wanted to examine too closely. I spent Christmas alone. Not lonely, intentional. I cooked for myself, read, slept. I didn't check my phone. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my balcony and watched fireworks bloom over the city, distant and impersonal. I thought about the offer they'd made, the money, the silence, how easy it would have been to take it and walk away. But walking away without your name intact isn't freedom. It's just a quieter kind of erasure. And I had already been erased once. I wasn't going to agree to it again, because some offers don't come too late. They reveal that the people making them were never offering the right thing in the first place. The final hearing was scheduled for January 12th, a date that landed with a dull weight to my chest the moment Laura told me. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood what it represented. Endings are rarely loud. They're procedural. I arrived at the courthouse early again. Same gray sky, same cold that cut through wool coats and good intentions. The security guard recognized me this time and nodded without comment. I took my seat behind Laura. Across the aisle, my parents sat apart, not dramatically, not angrily, strategically. My mother sat with her new attorney, posture rigid, jaw set. My father sat one row back, alone, hands folded, like he was waiting for a verdict that had already been delivered. Daniel arrived late. He looked different, thinner, less sure of himself. The confidence he'd worn into the earlier deposition was gone, replaced by something defensive and brittle. He didn't look at me. The judge entered. The room stood, then settled. This hearing wasn't about emotion. It was about authority. About whether my parents had the right to do what they did, and whether Daniel had the right to benefit from it. Laura began by summarizing what had already been established. No theatrics, no righteous tone. Just sequence. Power of attorney execution. Questionable location. Advisory memo. Transfer prior to notification. Financial leverage against disputed asset. She concluded with one sentence. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a preemptive exclusion. The opposing counsel tried to reframe. He spoke of intent, of family dynamics, of concern for my emotional stability following my broken engagement. The judge listened, then asked me to stand. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with awareness. I raised my right hand. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" the clerk asked. "I do." Laura asked me only a few questions. Where I had lived, what responsibilities I had carried regarding the house, whether I had been informed of any intent to transfer ownership. "No," I said. "What would you have done if you had been informed?" she asked. "I would have objected," I replied calmly, "and requested legal review." The judge nodded slightly. Opposing counsel stood. "Ms. Holloway," he said, "isn't it true that you are planning to move on from the house eventually?" "I was planning to decide," I said. "Those are not the same thing." He shifted. "And isn't it true that your brother needed financial stability?" I looked at him. "Need does not override consent," I said. A pause. The judge leaned forward. "That will be enough," he said. Daniel was called next. He looked nervous as he took the stand. His foot tapped against the wood floor. His answers came too fast. Yes, he knew the house was under dispute. Yes, he took out the line of credit anyway. Yes, he assumed it would work itself out. "Assumed," the judge repeated. Daniel nodded. "I trusted my parents," he said. That was supposed to sound sympathetic. It didn't. My father was not called. My mother was. She stood with visible irritation, hand on the back of the chair, chin lifted. She testified that everything had been done out of love, that she'd believed I was too overwhelmed to manage such a responsibility, that she'd acted as any mother would. The judge listened, then asked one question. "Did you believe your daughter was incapable of making decisions?" My mother hesitated. The room felt very still. "No," she said finally. "Then why did you remove her from the decision?" the judge asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. No answer came. That silence was louder than any argument. The judge adjourned briefly. 15 minutes. No one spoke. When he returned, he didn't waste time. "The court finds that the power of attorney was exercised beyond its intended scope," he said. "The transfer of the Holloway residence is hereby invalidated." My breath caught. "The property shall revert to the estate," he continued, "pending equitable redistribution consistent with the original will." He looked at Daniel. "Any financial instruments executed against the property are void." Daniel's shoulders slumped. The judge looked at my parents. "This court strongly advises all parties to seek independent counsel regarding future actions," he said. "This matter reflects a serious breakdown of fiduciary responsibility." The gavel fell. It was over. Outside the courtroom, my mother spoke to me for the last time. "You didn't have to humiliate us," she said quietly. I looked at her. "I didn't humiliate you," I replied. "I stopped protecting you." My father stood behind her, eyes red, mouth tight. Daniel walked past without a word. Claire wasn't there. I left with Laura. "You okay?" she asked as we stepped into the cold. "Yes," I said. And for the first time, it wasn't a lie. That night, I went home and sat in silence. No calls, no texts, no adrenaline. Just the steady awareness that something fundamental had ended. The house was no longer a symbol. It was a fact. And for the first time, the facts were on my side. But I also knew something else. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the end of their version. And once a family loses control of the narrative, they don't quietly accept it. They look for someone to blame. And this time, it wouldn't be me. The backlash didn't come immediately. That was the first thing I noticed. For almost 2 weeks after the ruling, there was nothing. No calls, no emails, no sudden visits. The silence was so complete, it felt intentional, like the pause before someone inhales. I used the time to do practical things. I changed passwords, closed shared accounts, removed my parents as emergency contacts, updated my address with the bank. Quiet work, administrative work. The kind of things you do when you're done hoping people will change. Christmas decorations appeared in store windows. Strings of white lights went up along Michigan Avenue. Every year before, this season had come with an unspoken obligation. Who would host? Who would be offended? Who would pretend nothing was wrong? This year, no one asked. On December 3rd, The first shoe dropped. It wasn't a call. It was an email from HR. "Could you stop by my office this afternoon?" It read. Just a routine inquiry. I knew immediately. My parents didn't know how to confront me directly anymore. So they did what they'd always done when they lost control. They went around me. HR's office was warm and overly cheerful, decorated with a miniature tree and a ceramic snowman that looked aggressively happy. Karen, the HR director, gestured for me to sit. "This is informal," she said quickly. "I just wanted to clarify something." She slid a printed email across the desk. It was from my mother. She'd written it 2 days earlier. Subject line, concern regarding employee well-being. She expressed deep worry about my emotional stability following recent family stress. Claimed I'd been isolating, acting erratically, and making impulsive legal decisions. Suggested the company ensure appropriate support was in place. I read it carefully, then looked up. "She's attempting to discredit me," I said calmly. Karen shifted. "We're not assuming anything," she said. "But given the tone is manipulative," I replied, and provably false. I handed her a folder. I'd prepared it the night the ruling came down. Inside were court documents, the judge's decision, a letter from Laura confirming my legal conduct, a timeline of events. Karen flipped through it, her expression changing with each page. "This is thorough," she said. "I anticipated retaliation," I replied. "This is not new behavior." Karen closed the folder. "Thank you for bringing this," she said. "I'll note that the concern was unfounded." She hesitated. "For what it's worth," she added, "this kind of outreach from a family member is inappropriate." "Yes," I said, "it is." When I left the office, I didn't feel angry. I felt confirmed. They hadn't changed tactics, just arenas. That weekend, Claire finally called. Her voice was tight. "They're spiraling," she said. "Mom keeps saying you betrayed her. Dad barely speaks. Daniel's in trouble with the bank." I listened without interrupting. "She's telling people you're unstable," Claire continued, "that the court was manipulated, that you're cold." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "She always calls women cold when they stop complying," I said. Claire was quiet. "I don't know where I fit anymore," she admitted. "You don't have to decide that now," I said. "But I won't help you manage that." "I know," she whispered. She hung up shortly after. On December 18th, I received a certified letter from my parents' attorney. They were contesting the redistribution of the estate, claiming undue influence, claiming I had coerced my grandmother prior to her death. It was a last grab, a loud one. Laura laughed when she read it. "This is weak," she said, "and expensive." "Let them spend," I replied. But the real turning point came 3 days before Christmas. I ran into my father at the grocery store. It was unplanned, unavoidable. He stood frozen in the aisle, staring at a display of canned soup like it held answers. He looked older, smaller. "Hi," he said finally. "Hi," I replied. We stood there, two strangers bound by history. "She didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. I studied his face. "You let it," I replied. He flinched. "I thought keeping the peace mattered," he said quietly. "And I thought being loved mattered," I said. We were both wrong. He nodded once. "I don't recognize your mother anymore," he admitted. "I do," I said. "I just stopped explaining her." We parted without a hug, without resolution. Christmas came. I spent it with friends, with Laura and her husband, with people who didn't require translation. I didn't miss them the way I thought I would. Grief, I learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the absence of dread. On New Year's Eve, Laura called. "They withdrew the contest," she said. Quietly, I exhaled. "They're out of money," she added, "and leverage." That night, as fireworks cracked over the city, I stood by my window and watched the lights. I thought about the word, revenge. This hadn't been that. I hadn't humiliated them publicly. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't exposed secrets for sport. I just refused to absorb the damage anymore. And that refusal had cost them everything they'd built on my silence. The truth is this: people who rely on your compliance will always frame your boundaries as cruelty. They'll call you cold, ungrateful, disloyal. What they really mean is unmanageable. And once you accept that, you stop explaining. You stop defending. You stop shrinking. You let the consequences land where they belong. Next chapter, the final one, isn't about them. It's about what happens after you choose yourself and how quietly powerful that choice becomes. January didn't arrive with fireworks or declarations. It came the way truth usually does. Slow, cold, and undeniable. The legal battle was over. The estate matter was resolved. The house sat in legal limbo, no longer a weapon, no longer a bargaining chip, just brick and paperwork. And for the first time in my adult life, no one was asking anything of me. That was the strangest part. No calls asking me to smooth things over. No messages hinting that families should stick together. No emergencies that only I could fix. The absence felt unnatural at first, like standing in a room after a loud machine shuts off and realizing how much noise you'd been tolerating. I started sleeping through the night. Not the shallow, alert sleep I'd trained myself into, but real rest. The kind where you wake up and don't immediately brace for impact. At work, something shifted. Without the constant background stress of managing my family's chaos, my focus sharpened. I finished projects early. I stopped over-explaining in meetings. I said no without qualifying it. In February, my supervisor called me into her office. "I've been watching you," she said. "You're different." I waited. "In a good way," she clarified. "You don't flinch anymore." 2 weeks later, she offered me a promotion. Not a consolation prize, not a pity move, a real one. More responsibility, more authority, more pay. I accepted without hesitation. When I told Laura, she smiled knowingly. "People underestimate what happens when you stop leaking energy," she said. She was right. The hardest part wasn't losing my parents' approval. It was realizing how much of myself I'd given away, trying to earn it. I thought often about my grandmother during that time, not in a sentimental way, in a clarifying one. I started going through the boxes she'd left behind: letters, old tax documents, journals. Not searching for evidence anymore, just understanding. In one notebook, I found a single sentence, written in careful cursive. "Women in this family survive by staying quiet. I hope that changes." I sat on the floor for a long time after reading that. Claire reached out once more in early March, not with drama, with honesty. "I moved out," she said. "I couldn't breathe there anymore." I didn't celebrate. I didn't advise. I just said, "I'm glad you listened to yourself." We met for coffee a few weeks later. Neutral ground, no family autopsy. She looked lighter. "They don't talk about you much," she admitted. "But when they do, it's different." "How?" I asked. "They're careful," she said, "like they're afraid of saying the wrong thing." I nodded. That's what happens when control fails. People learn restraint the hard way. I never went back to the house. I didn't need to. Eventually, it sold. Quietly. Legally. Fairly. My share was wired into my account without ceremony. No apology attached. No note. I didn't expect one. I used the money to pay off my student loans. I invested the rest. Practical choices. Grounded ones. Nothing symbolic. Freedom doesn't need theatrics. My father sent one final message in April. "I hope you're well," it read. "I think about you." I stared at it for a long time, then archived it, not out of anger, out of clarity. Some people don't get access just because they regret losing it. Spring came. The city softened. Trees budded. Sidewalk cafes reappeared like nothing had ever been wrong. And in that ordinary return to life, I realized something important. I wasn't rebuilding. I was living in a structure that had always been mine. I'd just never been allowed to occupy it fully. The anger faded. The grief dulled. What remained was something steadier. Self-respect. That's the part people don't warn you about. When you finally choose yourself, the world doesn't explode. It just rearranges. And the people who can't adapt to that new order quietly remove themselves. The final chapter isn't about closure. It's about what comes after you stop needing it. I used to believe closure was something another person gave you. An apology, an admission, a moment where they finally understood what they did and why it mattered. That belief kept me tethered to people, long after they'd proven they couldn't meet me where I stood. The truth is quieter. Closure happens the moment you stop asking to be seen by people who benefit from not seeing you at all. It happened for me on an ordinary Tuesday in May. Nothing dramatic, no confrontation. No phone call. Just a moment. I was sitting at my desk at work, reviewing a contract, when an email notification popped up from an unfamiliar address. I almost ignored it. The subject line read, Family Business Update. I already knew who it was from. My mother. She had created a new email account. The message was long, carefully worded, polished. She wrote about time passing, about misunderstandings, about how families fracture when people hold on to resentment. She said she didn't recognize me anymore. She said she hoped one day I'd remember where I came from. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge what she'd done. She didn't mention the house, the court, the lies, or the attempt to undermine my career. She framed the entire rupture as a mutual tragedy. Two sides, no accountability. I read it once, then again. Then I closed the window. I didn't respond. I didn't forward it to Laura. I didn't analyze it. I didn't feel angry. I felt finished. That was the day I understood something essential. People who manipulate don't change when they lose. They change when losing stops working. And when it doesn't, they look for a softer angle, a nostalgic one, an emotional one. I didn't owe her my past. I owed myself my future, so I blocked the address and went back to work. That summer, my life expanded in small, unglamorous ways. I moved apartments. Nothing fancy, just a place with more light and fewer echoes. I hosted friends for dinner without anxiety. I stopped rehearsing conversations before having them. I learned what it felt like to make decisions without mentally running them past an invisible panel of judges. Sometimes I still thought about my family, not with longing, with distance. Like looking at a house you once lived in and realizing the floor plan never really worked for you. At a work conference in September, a colleague asked me where I learned to negotiate so calmly. I shrugged. I stopped confusing pressure with authority, I said. She laughed, but I meant it. That's the thing no one tells you. Control often wears the costume of love. Obligation dresses itself up as care. And the people who benefit most from your silence will always accuse you of betrayal the moment you speak. I didn't win because I took something from them. I won because I stopped giving them access to me. The house was never the point. The inheritance was never the point. The point was that I had been excluded from my own life for years and told it was for my own good. Once I saw that clearly, there was no going back. On Thanksgiving that year, I didn't attend a family dinner. I made my own meal. I ate slowly. I didn't rush. I didn't brace for comments. I didn't wait for tension. I enjoyed the quiet. And I thought about the version of myself from a year earlier. The woman who still believed that if she explained things well enough, calmly enough, lovingly enough, she could earn fairness. She didn't need better arguments. She needed permission to walk away. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me sooner. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You are not selfish for choosing peace over performance. And you are not cruel for enforcing boundaries that others benefited from you not having. People will call you cold when you stop bleeding for them. Let them. Cold is often just what survival looks like from the outside. And survival, when chosen consciously, becomes dignity. If this story resonated with you, especially if you've ever felt pushed aside, controlled, or erased by the people who were supposed to love you, you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you're listening from. And if stories like this help you feel seen, supported, or just a little less crazy for choosing yourself, consider subscribing to the channel. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't payback. It's walking away whole and living well without permission.